Hey everybody, how you doing? I'm Eric Gerlach, and this is another talk about Daoism. Acting like a fool. Taoists and others, myself never, act like a fool. Sometimes. Maybe. So in one verse of the Tao Te Ching, the original texts of Taoism, but one of the original bamboo Lao Tzu verses, verse 41 of Wang Bi's version, but one of the original oldest verses of the Tao, the core Taoist philosophy, it says, "The bright way is dim, the way forward seems backward. The true power seems lowly, the pure seems poisoned, the steady seems lazy, the easy seems difficult, and the straight seems crooked. So the wise work on the way. Most try the way and lose it, and the bad hear the way and laugh at it." Hopefully we're all bad to the bone, yes? Or funny bone, etc. The text tells us that if no one laughs, you're not with the way. So again, with my jokes, no one is. But Taoists often act like fools, very much like Yoda on Dagobah clownin', to conceal that they are wise, sometimes not to be bothered by fools who want things, and other times to test others and see if they are wise or fools. This kind of foolin', as my great-grandmother would have said, grew up in rural California, this foolery, became famous in Zen Buddhism, which borrows the very un-Buddhist but very Taoist strategies of using lies and foolishness to teach us how to be wise rather than foolish. In Chinese literature, and movies such as Drunken Master, Iron Monkey, and even Star Wars, again with Yoda, wise masters live obscurely and teach those who are wise by pretending to be jerks. And they believe in pretending to be jerks. Not actually being jerks, which is a whole different situation, but pretending to be jerks, yes, perfectly fine, nice and legal. Whether or not they need to be legal. Liezi, Master Lie, the third most important Taoist after Lao Tzu and Chuang-Tzu, Liezi had many students, I love this story, who he argued with day and night, but he lived next to Nanguozi, Master Nanguo, whom he never spoke with. He never talks to the guy, his neighbor, who's supposedly this other master. At this time, nobody was a Taoist necessarily, but there were a bunch of people who would then be called Taoists who were doing similar things, it would seem. So there's another guy. There's a lot of sages throughout Chuang-Tzu and Liezi's work where it's like, who's this guy? Who's this guy? Who's her? Who's him? Well, they're just masters who happen to be around who are similar, it seems. So Liezi is living next to Nanguozi, so there are these two Taoist masters, and his students ask him is he an enemy of yours? Do you guys not like each other? Because you never seem to hang out and talk, so what's the deal? Because you guys are sort of proto-Taoist masters, similarly, although they may not have known to say Taoist. They would have been like, aren't you with the Weiyists? Why aren't the two realityists realitying together in reality? So Liezi says, well, let's all go see. He says, Liezi says there's simply no speaking with him, which is a wonderful joke. There's just no speaking with him. Hey guys, let's go find out. He says, let's all go see what Nanguozi is about, which is a wonderful comedy setup. It's like, let's all go see there's no talking to him, children. And they all go storm as a crowd over next door, with the bit, the Monty Python animated bit. And Liezi suggests they go into his place, they walk into Nanguozi's place, and Nanguozi is like a statue, and it seems that he doesn't even recognize Liezi, and he has no idea what's going on. But then suddenly he points at the last student in the back of the crowd and begins heckling him like a bigot who is always determined to be in the right. They then return to Liezi's house, and all the students are confused. None of them have any idea what happened, and Liezi tells them this is a man who truly knows how to say nothing. I love this story. It's a lot like a Zen koan story, and this is before Zen koan stories, and Zen, in writing the koan stories in Tang, China, compiling these the koan collections in Tang and Song, China, they were compiling stories much like this, and these are Taoist-influenced Buddhists. So this here is probably, in Chinese culture, an early koan story before koan Zen stories are a Chan Zen thing at all. It's an early Taoist example of what will go on to be something like an early example of what Zen folks call koan cases, which is like what is the sound of one hand clapping, etc. which are longer interactions, which often get shortened down to the simple turning words of what is the sound of one hand clapping, but they're usually in context, and then that's in the larger context of life, and this is the sort of larger story, which some Zen traditions whittle down to the simple turning phrase, which I do and don't like, but we'll get into that later. Because we're still doing Daoism pre-Zen Buddhism. That is for Buddhist and Asian philosophy. What we're doing is a series of talks on Daoism before we get into Chinese Buddhism and particularly Chan and Zen Buddhism. So in Chinese, let's see, we got that. So I love this story. So Nanguosa sits there, and he seems to not recognize Lietza himself. He just seems to, which is symbolic, because Nanguoza is not recognizing distinction between master and student. He's like, oh, a bunch of people, it's all fine. It reminds of the Buddhist sutras, like the Potapata and other sutras, where you cannot tell who is who's master and who's servant, and you're explicitly told this. Nanguoza ignorantly acts like that on purpose. He's like, I don't know the difference between anybody. But then what does he do? He heckles a student in the back as if he's a bigot and a jerk who always needs to be right. Sounds like a common narcissist, or something like that. There's fancy wording. Narcissism is technically Uda Nazis de Fromm, which again is a much later word for being a jerk. Again, the Egyptians say, don't be the jerk. You don't want to be that guy. They're bad at everything. That's that guy. He's always doing everything terrible, So like that jerk, like a common jerk, what does he do? Well, Nanguoza is a brilliant Zen master, but he's not a Zen master. He's an earlier Taoist Buddhist whom the Zen masters are using as a model. So, what does he do? He doesn't recognize who's good, which is kind of cool, but then he goes for the weak spot in the crowd that enters. What he does is he points at you are the weakest link, like that show. It's like he goes for the weakest link, the student who's hesitant in the back. He's like, hey, jerk, you with this crowd? Huh? And after this, Lietza leads them all back home. He's like, that guy's cool. Now, why is that guy cool? This is a great Taoist Buddhist moment, because the Taoists do not care if they are lying to you. They care about the effect that they are having on the situation. Nanguoza clearly does not want to impress anyone. He does not want anyone to know who he is. But interestingly, he can do that in a Zen-like way such that he can communicate on a wavelength with people who recognize and set it up kind of like a humorous art project chess game comedy sketch, in which he stood, hey, I'm a jerk, and you're a jerk. In the back, you're stupid. That's why you're a coward. In the back, yeah, you. And he just does that, and it's like, wow, that's a master of emotion right there. Well, why is that a master of emotion? Isn't he a jerk? He's playing one on TV, and he's good at it. Now, this is very Zen, because the Buddhists normally would act very pious and very nice, and say, we are good, we are good. Zen Buddhists like slapping you and be like, I'm a jerk, aren't I? And this they get from Daoism. And here he is specifically showing he does not need any pride from anyone. He does not need anyone thinking he is a good person. He is solid. So he is hiding. He is like a Taoist master hiding like Yoda on Dagobah. He is not showing off. He is not showing it. He is not doing anything. And then, of course, in the newer Yoda can do backflips with all kinds of amazingness. But he doesn't show it off at all. He barely moves it, which is exactly the person you need to look out for, because that's the person who's really hiding the goods. And he basically, of course, that's why Lietza is like, no, that guy, not me, that guy, that's amazing. Because he's not even leading students, and he's actually like, and he's like, because he's really into, and here before you say he can't have any influence, here Lietza and other Taoists would say, no, he's having impact in ways he may know and we may not, is what they would say. Whether or not you or I believe them, and they wouldn't care, would they? Because they act like jerks, like this. Very much like a comedian, of course, and it's interrelated with Taoism, with Zen, and with comedy, especially with modern comedy. Stand-up comedy is decently American. That you are acting like a jerk on TV on purpose. It's wonderful to be I love Groucho Marx, I love Ambrose Bierce, I love American comedians, and it is wonderful to have cultures around the world who believe in acting the fool, as we are going to talk about here, And this is a wonderful story of the third most important Taoist text. We started with an earliest line from the first most, but this is a wonderful story about being a jerk that specifically predates the Zen koan cases, which is a lot like a Zen koan case. And it is also one master going to see another master, confirming the historical lineage in the textual document of both names being awesome. When somebody and somebody else are mentioned, and one they pass in the night, and one's like, huh, that is both Zen masters or both Taoist masters being historically established in the textual record that we are reading and interpreting. In the Bible, Jesus goes to this person, he goes to Galilee, he goes to there. That establishes where he's teaching, who he's teaching, to whom, whether or not that did or did not exactly happen the ways the texts say. It is establishing historically the precedent and the history of the movement. And so this is mentioning Nangguosa and roping him into the Taoist sage fool canon. So this guy is being included in this story, I believe in this story, as far as I can read alone, as an excellent Taoist master because he is this kind of jerk, or acts like it, I will go into Zen Master Joshu when we get to Zhaoshu in Chinese, Joshu in Japanese. I will probably default to Joshu because it's easier for me to say, unfortunately. Is that the Japanese Joshu, Chinese originally, he does a lot of fooling very profoundly like this. I love him a lot because he is such a good guy at this kind of stuff. And he is certainly reading these kinds of texts, and he quotes Shuangzi, so he probably has read the Liezi or two. And he is certainly clowning, and he seems to know how to push this up a level like a stand-up comedian following another great stand-up comedian in an era, in another era. It seems that way. And again, that's why it's wonderful to study Taoism before you study Zen Buddhism, because then you can actually see the rich connections of, wow, no, that story, and then I can see now why this story follows that one. Otherwise, a lot of times Americans, and others, they clip moments of Zen Buddhism out, and they're like, ooh, it stands and rings like a bell by itself. Yes, but these guys all read the same text plenty, and the only place you could get literate in the monasteries. They would have known of some of this stuff at least, that they're copying these examples and slapping people and being crazy. So again, this is why I pause on this story so much, is because this is such a truly impactful and important story. It is truly a wonderful, wonderful story. So we have here another story in the Liezi. The Yellow Emperor is said to have spent 15 years pleasing only himself. Ew, Let's hope not the way that sounds. And the next 15 years trying to please everyone in the empire. Also, ew, you're really going to have to ice down the elbows. But both wore him out, and his heart deteriorated. Again, it's like that'll wear you clean out, After meditating for 3 years, which shows you he's a Taoist he's certainly not a Confucian. Confucians don't believe in meditation, really, and maybe Neo-Confucians do in forms. He fell asleep and dreamed of a land where there are no rulers or subjects. This is the Yellow Emperor. This is one of the founders of Chinese state and civilization. And he is dreaming of an anarchistic land in which there are no rulers or subjects, where everything naturally followed its course and did not try for anything else. After he wakes up, he calls his ministers and he tells them he has found the way, but he cannot tell them about it. I can't tell you about the anarchist land. What's the joke there? Well, there can be things culturally lost. I would say modern and ancient Chinese and say modern and possibly ancient American tribal thinkers would read that, or hear that story and think, well, I bet he's not telling. It's kind of a joke at the expense of the Yellow Emperor, potentially, who's a very revered figure and is actually a highly revered figure in Taoism, but he's a bit of a trickster, which is why I include it here. By the way, I dreamed of a perfect land of milk and honey, and by the way, I'm not going to tell you it had no emperors in it, because he's an emperor, you know what I mean? It's like he gets the milk and the honey in this era, so why is he going to ditch the honeys? No, he's not. So, Confucius says, don't spend all your time with dancing girls, you need to, if you're the emperor, and yeah, it seems like he's enjoying a little bit of the emperorhood. The text can and should be probably read in this humorous way, that's why I include it, is because the Yellow Emperor's, I can't tell you about it. Yep. It's like, it sounds like the Yellow Emperor's a little bit of a jokey jerk, and that's hilarious. So we move on here to the 8 great immortals, the great 8, the 8 great, the hateful 8. They're not that hateful though. I'm from the hate. They don't care about rank, They act a bit hippie anarchist, again, like the hate. They act like immoral fools. And they take down stupid and greedy nobles, officials, merchants, first and foremost, the Jade Emperor, the administrator of the cosmos himself, either sort of god and or the demiurge of Plato, and they decide to screw with this guy. Now, this is polytheistic. Again, what we have actually in the Abrahamic faiths, you very much have polytheisticness of Greece and Israel and other people moving into more monotheism, and then it gets more exclusively monotheistic, although they keep saints and sages and jinn in the Islamic world and angels and all sorts of things. So technically there's many forces and yet one sort of force. What we see in more polytheistic India and China, they do move more kind of the way and the force and the one. They most cultures, I would say, that stack do get into a oneness and an allness increasingly, plenty that way. The bigger the society, the more there's many's of alls of one. But also, this is the Jade Emperor. This is technically the king of the cosmos. So this is sort of the closest to Jehovah, Yahweh, however one pronounces the vowels or includes them or not, And this is this is sort of the administrator, emperor, guy of the cosmos. And the 8 great immortal Taoists are going to go screw with effectively acting God, and because they like to screw with they're trickster gods and are going to screw with the cosmos. Here you definitely have a one and order being screwed with by a pleasant, happy many and chaos. And that is rare, just like with the All-Mom. It is rare for systems to praise females as equals or superiors, possibly, as we got with that video, which check that out, that this is actually many chaotic tricksters possibly screwing with a one king guy, which is in world religions rare, because oftentimes the oneness would be more noble and not screwed with by the many. Same with male, female, sorts of dynamics, etc. Dynamics. So, the immortals, that they don't care about rank, so they're disrespecting the emperor, the Jade Emperor, because they're like, man, this guy, cosmos, order, what is that? Come on, that the Jade Emperor has them thrown out of his birthday party. They are thrown out of God's birthday party and demoted in the Book of Record, which is the Book of Life, like basically God's own history, Bible, righty diary, dear diary. Today, it's, again, I always remember back in the day in the Berkeley humor paper, The Squelch, there was a thing is that God's diary, it's like day 3. It's like I gave my happiness principles to Shlomo and he laughed at them. So I smoked him, it's like thunk. It's like, yep, no more Shlomo, is that in the Book of Record, which their names are cast out of the book, and they don't care. Like, this is actually that God is like, I'm casting your names out of the Book of Life. And they're like, you know what, that doesn't really matter, does it? Like, that's actually what's going on here, which is why this is not entirely Abrahamic. And yet you do find those dynamics back and forth in the Old and New Testament. You find interesting back and forths here. But they are basically, in a polytheistic more system, going to King Guy and saying, the fact that you struck our names from the book, yeah, we're just going to go on living and be immortal and do our own thing, which is very, of course, counterweight to what often has happened in human cultures. But it was happening because there's back and forth in human cultures. So he has them thrown out of his birthday party and demoted in the Book of Record. Why does he do this? Why does sort of God of the gods of polytheism do this? Because they brought him simple, stupid gifts. Because they show up and they don't bring him fancy gifts. So God, the God of gods, polytheistic emperor, has them thrown out of the birthday party. Now that's a situation in an 80s comedy to make fun of the guy, isn't it? I mean, now you have to clown this dude, which is what they do. They come back and they clown him. So it's a real stand-up comedy, with all of this stuff, the standing order of things. So the immortals, they don't care about lying or stealing to do what is right in the long run. It's like if you steal something, you give it back. It's all effectively some kind of reincarnation. If you're more in touch with the cosmos than this jerk guy running the order. Who's this guy, who thinks he can be like Bueller and just make everybody in order? So the immortals, they don't care about lying or stealing to do what's right in the long run. So they steal the Jade Emperor's best gifts. They're like, oh, you don't like fire. They give him a bunch of random stuff, and he's like, no, I don't like any of your rocks you brought me. So they bring him the best and the nicest of gifts before he can open them. They basically re-gift them to him, along with they bring, oddly, fireflies and crickets. And they bring them, which are very lowly base things, but kind of fascinating and beautiful. And they're insects. Insects are the lowliest of creatures, of animals-ish, and which the emperor hasn't been, and the emperor is delighted by all these things. And he thinks these are the best gifts ever. Now, what that tells you subtly is the emperor not only hadn't opened his own presents and he's ignorant, the Lord of Order, and he screwed up and he doesn't know his own best gifts, which they give back to him, and he doesn't recognize them. Sort of like almost our life, if our head is very much a dumb kind of god of the gods and leader of the leaders, and then we're not paying attention to things, well, then we're reminded by many things in life of what's good, even if we have our head in the clouds or are off somewhere. But you also have that the insects, the fireflies, the Jade Emperor's like, this is amazing. That shows you how he has not been down to earth, at least in a while, doesn't it? He thinks fireflies are beautiful. If you meet sort of king god of the gods, and he's like, whoa, what is this? A firefly, you call it? Nice Lord of Order, you know what I mean? You got that would be Lord of Laws. That's very much, a high-priced judge who's way up. Well, it's high. Judges are all high-priced. Takes a lot to buy them. Yeah, Senator. That basically, of course, it's like this is a guy who has not been down to earth to see the order that he's been ordering. So this is definitely a bit more critical of the god of gods and polytheism, and screwing with it with the lower country bumpkins. Telling the big guy with the fancy birthday party, where he can take it. So yeah, it's interesting. It's very in world religions. It's quite unique and interesting. So and again, they don't mind pulling this scheme. Why don't they mind being jerks exactly like this? Well, because this is what seems to be dumbly right. This is what we sort of feel out stupidly in our open hearts, and we're like, yeah, no, I get it. Hopefully, we could have all sorts of reactions. And with all of this philosophy, of course, it does cause people to go in duck rabbit opposite ways. And that is part of it. That is very deeply part of all of this. And human thought, interpreting things as duck rabbits, both ways. Like the boy with the axe and the gold. So the immortals eat food, leave, and don't care about the promotion or keeping to a position. Technically, the funny thing is he has them struck from the book of life. He has them then put back in the book of record, the book of who gets officially what. He probably assigns them a bunch of fancy titles. And then what do? They just go right back to their lives, the 8 immortals. They don't care. Because basically, notice they gain. It says in the Tao, gain a position, don't care. Lose a position, don't care. Well, they lost a position, they don't care. They sort of did. They came back, they screwed with them. They gains a position, gain all sorts of positions, and maybe he gave them heavenly titles and pure lands, not Buddhist ones, but otherwise. Maybe they just heavens, as many gods, many heavens, many heaven realms, many pure lands, and they just went back to earth and did their own thing and didn't care about what nobility. Maybe I have a castle in France somewhere. I don't know. They just didn't care. Which, of course, they didn't care. They lost their title. It was more the guy was a jerk. And then they impressed him. God, the god of gods loves them again. He's like, oh, this is cool. The Lord of Orders and stuff. And then they're like, yeah, we don't care what fiefdoms you gave us. We're out of here. It's a great story. Anybody who thinks Chinese culture or Chinese folks are authoritarian, it's like, I do point out with this, it's very possible to cherry pick in the West. Not only is the West just the West altogether, rather recently, not entirely, and you can, I have more about that. Especially after Auschwitz is when just white West kind of all smashed together. Oh no, it's just sort of itself. Very recently, very 50s and onward. But you also have in that people cherry pick moments of Robin Hood, or not always Robin Hood, but of Greek culture and things, and they say, the West is a freedom culture because there was some voting in Athens. Well, right here you have a bunch of people screw with an emperor, and the emperor's an idiot. Well, does that make people think, Chinese culture is white, do Americans think, Chinese culture isn't authoritarian? They have examples like that. Well, no, people just sort of think Chinese culture would be monolithic or something. I do this, of course, and I say this because you can cherry pick moments of freedom and slavery from Greece and Rome and India and China, and then we can talk about practices and forms that are happening today. I do offer people, again, I always say, we vote, the Chinese vote, theirs doesn't, and ours does matter. How? Explain it to or try to figure it out for yourself, and you will get a better answer, honestly, than I'm going to give you now, because I'm going to give you none. Again, I will tell you no lies. I will tell you nothing. Yes? And another thing. We're going to go on to another story here. And Lu Dongbin, again Lu, there's Lu and Han, again like Luke and Han, the most popular immortal a doctor to the poor, kind of like Iron Monkey. Watch that film from back in the day. And master of evil spirits. Iron Monkey is a great old school Hong Kong action movie. Watch Iron Monkey if you have the chance. And yeah, it's a doctor who goes around Robin Hooding people with magical kung fu powers. It's amazing. Kung fu, it's great. He is a doctor to the poor. He's a master of evil spirits, which honestly there's a lot of evil animism about, in advertising, etc. He tricks Guan Yin, the Buddhist goddess. So this is Daoism competing with Buddhism in probably more Tang and then Song China. Probably more around the time of the Tang is when this story would have developed and gotten popular or based on earlier versions. Guan Yin, so this is now that at least 600, 700 in China, this side of Zero and Jesus. So around 600 CE, 700 CE, we're having the story develop that one of the, it's supposed to be long ago, of course, that the Buddhist goddess Guan Yin, who has now made her way to China, she has this, technically it's a Buddhist goddess, it's a bodhisattva, again, sort of a goddess to the Chinese, etc. It's, again, what's a god, what's a goddess, what's a bodhisattva? This great goddess-like figure, a Buddhist figure, Buddhist goddess, that she is tricked into marrying a mortal man, which honestly she was being somewhat deceptive herself, so he tricks her into her own trickery. Basically, this Taoist god wanders by a Buddhist goddess, and this Buddhist goddess is acting like she may marry a man, but she doesn't, and she's a Buddhist goddess, which means she's all celibate and she's not sexual. And then the Taoist god's like, I'm gonna trick you into marrying the guy, which means this is a Taoist god trying to trick a Buddhist goddess into being sexual, which is the Taoists are more sexy body than the Buddhists, and the Zen folk like making sexy jokes and then being celibate because they're being influenced by the Taoists. So we actually have here the sexy Taoists, the more sexual Taoists, trying to trick the Buddhists who have shaved heads and are all celibate into being a bit more, like a goddess, yes. So as if they want her not to simply be beautiful as a ruse, as mortal human shell, yes, but to get it on somehow. They are trying to trick the Buddhist goddess into getting it on. So that's a little bit of, and as we'll mention more with Buddhism and Chinese culture, when Buddhism comes into China from India, it was feared xenophobically as a kind of celibate weirdness, kind of like Protestants somewhat fear Catholicism as being celibate, therefore somewhat, weird, and then there's all sorts of factors contribute to that. Let's not get into it. But that there's something about celibacy where it can weird people out in weird ways if it's a different foreign culture especially. And there's ways where Indian Buddhism, when it comes into China, is kind of celibate, and the Chinese are like we kind of believe in the familial and sex and procreation and a lot of kids. Everybody does. The India does. Everybody does. But celibate monks, that seems a little evil to procreative, let's have a lot of kids and the stuff. In a weird way, almost like, I don't think it's exactly the same, but if you're into Protestantism, Mormonism, having tons of kids, Catholic celibacy of priests, specifically and nuns, may seem a little weird, may seem a little strange and foreign, even though Christianity's foreign to America, foreign to Europe, all of that. Not Mormonism, actually, that's native to the Americas. But yes, the Buddhist god is trying to be tricked into, again, a little lack of celibacy here. Lu is himself tricked by two earlier of the other 8 immortals into getting a beautiful Taoist hermit. He gets it on with pregnant. Basically, they set him up to have a beautiful Taoist, essentially somewhat sort of, it's almost like he is this amazing wizard, and then they're like, we have this beautiful female graduate student we want you to live with in a cave. And it's like, yeah, one thing leads to obviously another. And so we actually have a great Taoist god being an idiot and being fooled himself by sex, which means here we have a more polytheistic ancient gods. As with a lot of stuff, the older gods, they're just very human, they're very sexual, they're like Zeus, they're kind of dumb, like they don't know stuff. Hercules is kind of a big dummy. Then you have more unitive gods that are all-seeing and have a lot more power. That grows with the city-states and with empires. Now you have gods that can see all the other gods or are alone or other stuff. Earlier, it's like gods can get tricked by sex like any lord or jerk, plenty. Again, the Babylonians say, you can teach a god to trot after you like a dog, is one of the wisdom quotes of the Babylonians, because they're polytheists. Like, gods are not all powerful. They're actually telling you to flip the gods off a bit. Polytheistic-wise, because they're not all powerful. They may be gods of Babylon, but not Egypt. Like, they're not all, but they're strongy strong, they're truthy true, they're not it itself. There isn't yet. Plenty. Is there yet? Plenty. So, Li Dai Guai, one of the two who tricked Lu, is tricked by Lao Tzu himself, who tempts him, the other immortal, to stray from his practices with a beautiful daughter who seems to seriously want Li, but is actually an enchanted piece of wood. Again, like in Monty Python, I am entirely made of wood. What actually happens here, if Lao Tzu can be compared to Buddha and Jesus, and Lao Tzu is the founder of a major, or at least inadvertently, if he was trying to, or not, or try not so much, he inadvertently founded a major religion, or sort of did. And we are presented with a much later tale in which Lao Tzu has evolved into a kind of wizard in later Chinese culture, in which he disguises himself as a woodcutter. He goes to the Taoist immortal, who's all celibate and being like a Taoist, like I am not having sex. Has mentioned in Taoism, there's traditions that say if you don't have sex at all, you can live to be forever, ever, ever, ever. If you have sex, you often can only live to be 200 years old. It's like, damn. You know, so basically this guy's sitting there trying to be all celibate, and not do the sex magic and Taoist practices to longevitate. I'm not sure that we can longinate that word. Longevity. Yes. And so Lao Tzu himself, Jesus and or Buddha of Daoism, shows up with a beautiful girl. He says, hey, take my daughter under your wing. I have to go now. There's a horrible storm. She's like, hey, sailor, cuddles up next to him. He's like, again, like the Buddhist koan story, it's like everywhere there is no warmth. No, no, no. And she's like, all right, buddy, I guess I'll go sweep the cave then again. So, and then basically Lao Tzu shows back up. He's like, oh, I enchanted a piece of wood to trick you. Which means Buddha of Daoism, Lao Tzu, master of Daoism, enchants pieces of wood into sexy lady people in order to try to fool people with sex. Like, this is not the Buddha. Could sort of be, but weirdly in a Chinese story where then it was somewhat influenced by Daoism. The Taoists do not care about using lies, sex, videotape. They do not care. YouTube, not important. Like, everything in life is everything in life. So as long as you are being super cool, not, you're cool, keeping it low, fooling people. In Drunken Master, famously, in the original Jackie Chan, one of Jackie Chan's movies that made him famous, which is Chinese culture, Hong Kong action, Hong Kong, keeping these kind of cultures alive and well. The master comes up and he says, hey, I got a young girl. Great rack. You want in? He's like, no. He's like, okay, cool. I'm the master. You're in. And it's like, what just happened? Like, did he just try to pimp, an imaginary girl out? Well, it's following Lao Tzu. Hey, you want some? There is no girl. Like, it's a piece of wood. Or there is no, young lady. It's like, it's a con. They don't mind using a con because they're trying to see if you're serious or not. That's what's important. And that's utilitarian lying, here we come. There's just no end, of course. But they would also say they're not into making factories of any kind for better or worse because they're keeping themselves low and hippies and anarchists decently. So apparently they can enchant pieces of wood in order to try to trick people into having sex with it. So, yeah. So in that, since we're talking about a bunch of body weirdness, we have, gotten another half hour here. So I'm going to go on with another talk. I am trying to lengthen these out. I do love Taoism. So we're going to have another talk here on holding no rank, and then we will have another talk on anarchism. Oh, well, there isn't a lot of holding no rank before the anarchism. We probably will. That was acting like a fool. We're going to talk here about no rank and anarchism in another talk and another video. So, much happiness. Again, try to be one with everything in yourself somehow, which you already are, and I will see you if I see you.